What if the quiet you have been searching for your whole life is the very thing you are most afraid of? Have you ever noticed that when life finally slows down, when the demands stop, when there are no immediate problems to solve, when the room is finally still, a strange kind of dread begins to creep in? You sit there, and instead of feeling relief, your mind starts whispering. It tells you that something is wrong. It tells you that it is too quiet. It tells you that the other shoe is about to drop. Most people do not realize they are living in a constant state of preparation for a disaster that may never come. You spend your days wishing for a break, longing for the chaos to settle. But the moment the storm clears, you cannot rest. You start anticipating bad news. You scan your life for problems. You wonder who is secretly upset with you, what mistake you made yesterday, or what sudden tragedy is waiting around the corner. If you have ever felt this way, unable to relax in the rare moments of calm, this is for you. Stay until the end, because understanding this fear may change the way you experience the rest of your life. It is an exhausting way to live, borrowing pain from a future that has not arrived, bleeding from wounds that have not even been cut. In Buddhist thought, there is a deep understanding of this restless mind. Buddhist wisdom teaches us that the untrained mind is terrified of emptiness. It is addicted to motion, to fixing, to worrying. When the external world goes quiet, the mind creates its own internal noise to fill the void. We suffer not because of the reality of the present moment, but because of the illusions we project into the future. We mistake our anxiety for intuition, and we cling to worry as if it is a heavy shield. Imagine a bird that has lived its entire life inside a small cage. Every day, it beats its wings against the metal bars, exhausting itself, dreaming of the open air. But one day, the heavy door is left wide open. The sky outside is vast, clear, and perfectly silent. And the bird, terrified of all that unbroken space, retreats into the darkest corner of its cage. The cage was painful, yes, but it was familiar. The open sky is beautiful, but it requires trust. We do the exact same thing with our inner peace. When life gifts us a clear, calm sky, we retreat into the familiar cage of our anxieties. We think about work stress, an unanswered message, or our unspoken family conflicts. We believe that if we stay on guard, we can outsmart the unpredictability of life. We think that by expecting the worst, it will somehow hurt less when it arrives. But here is the truth. Worrying does not empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It only empties today of its strength. It takes the beautiful, fragile piece of this exact second and shatters it over something that exists only in your imagination. Think about your own life. Ask yourself, what are you afraid will happen if you simply let the moment be good? What are you protecting yourself from? Are you confusing peace with danger simply because you have lived in the storm for so long? Pause. Breathe. Look around you right now. In this exact second, there is no emergency. You do not have to solve a problem right now. You do not have to brace for an imaginary impact. Observe the fearful thought without following it into the dark. Let the quiet simply be quiet, because peace is not a trap. It is simply space. But learning to exist in that space without filling it with fear is a journey. And this is where the next truth begins. Because to stop waiting for the storm, we must first understand why we started borrowing this pain in the first place. 2. Borrowing pain from tomorrow. Why do we punish ourselves for things that have not happened yet? Here is a truth that is difficult to face. Much of the pain you are feeling right now is entirely self-inflicted. It is not caused by your current reality. It is caused by your imagination. You are suffering in advance. When things are going well, or even when they are just quiet, the mind searches for a problem. You lie in bed at night, staring at the ceiling, And instead of resting, you begin to build tragedies. You imagine the failure of a project. You picture a loved one walking away. You rehearse an argument that has never taken place, feeling your heart race and your jaw clench. You endure the grief, the rejection, and the anxiety of a future that exists only in your own thoughts. We do this because we think it is a form of protection. We believe that if we practice the pain now, it will not hurt as much when the bad news finally arrives. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us something very different about this habit. In Buddhist thought, the mind is often described as a wandering traveler, constantly leaving the present moment to visit the ghosts of the past, or the illusions of the future. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that the future is not a reality, it is merely a projection. When you suffer over what might happen, you are choosing to suffer over a phantom. You are abandoning the only place where life actually exists, the present moment. Imagine a traveler walking through a beautiful, quiet forest on a sunny day. Instead of looking at the trees or feeling the warmth of the sun, the traveler is bent over, exhausted, carrying a massive iron shield. They are weighed down, sweating, and miserable. Why? Because they are convinced that at any moment, a terrible storm might break or a mountain might collapse. They are so busy protecting themselves from a threat that is not there, that they completely miss the peace of the walk. They create their own misery through the sheer weight of their preparation. How often are you that traveler in your own life? You carry the heavy iron shield of worry into your relationships, into your work, into your quiet evenings alone. You convince yourself that relaxing is dangerous. You think that if you let your guard down, life will punish you. So, you stay tense, you stay anxious, you stay prepared for the worst. But think about your own life. Think about all the terrible scenarios you have desperately worried about over the years. How many of them actually came to pass exactly as you feared? And even if hardship did arrive, did your days of silent panicking make it any easier to bear? Or did it simply rob you of the joy you could have had before the hardship began? Ask yourself, what heavy stones of tomorrow are you trying to carry today? Is this fearful thought bringing you peace, or is it only feeding your exhaustion? There is a simpler way to live. When the mind starts to race forward, gently call it back. Pause, breathe, feel your feet on the ground. Bring your attention to exactly where you are. If you are drinking a warm cup of tea, just drink the tea. If you are sitting in a quiet room, just sit in the quiet room. Do not let your mind drag you into a future that has not yet been written. You do not need to solve tomorrow's problems today. Let today be enough. Because carrying the weight of the future does not make you stronger, it only breaks your spirit in the present. But laying down that heavy weight requires us to look closely at the false safety we have built around ourselves. And this is where the next truth begins. 3. The false shield of worry. What if the tighter you hold on to your worry, the more fragile you become? Here is a truth that is hard to admit. We do not worry because we are weak. We worry because we secretly believe it gives us control. Think about how you move through the world. When someone you care about is distant, you overanalyze their silence. When life becomes quiet, you anticipate a sudden crisis. You mentally map out every possible disaster, every potential heartbreak, every silent rejection. You do this because you believe that if you can predict the pain, you can somehow soften the blow. You use your anxiety as a shield. You think that expecting the worst is a heavy armor that will keep you safe from being caught off guard. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us something profound about this illusion. In Buddhist thought, suffering arises from our refusal to accept things as they are. We cling to the desire for permanence and predictability in a world that is fundamentally unpredictable. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that our attempt to control the uncontrollable is the very source of our emotional pain. Worry is not a shield, It is simply the mind's desperate attempt to argue with reality. Imagine a tall tree standing alone on the edge of a great valley. When the sky grows dark and the heavy winds begin to howl, the tree does not tense its branches. It does not try to fight the wind or hold onto its fragile leaves with a rigid, desperate grip. If it did, its stiff branches would easily snap under the terrible pressure. Instead, the tree yields. It lets the wind rush through its leaves. It bends deeply in the storm. It survives not by resisting the weather, but by being rooted deeply in the quiet earth and allowing the storm to simply be a storm. We often do the exact opposite. When the winds of uncertainty blow into our lives, we tense up. We fight the empty air. We believe our rigid resistance will keep us safe. We think our overthinking will somehow solve the mystery of someone else's feelings. We think our endless worrying will protect our future, our peace, our sense of worth. But all this resistance does is make us brittle. We become so stiff with fear that the slightest breeze feels like a hurricane, and the smallest moment of quiet feels like a disaster waiting to strike. Think about your own life. What are you desperately trying to control right now? What outcome are you trying to force through the sheer power of your worry? Ask yourself, has expecting bad news ever actually prevented it from arriving? Has rehearsing a tragedy in your mind ever made it easier to live through? Or has it merely forced you to live through the heartbreak twice, once in your imagination and once in reality? You can choose a different way. You do not have to fight the wind. Pause. Breathe. Do your part in life, then release the outcome. Observe the urge to worry, but do not obey it. Stop trying to hold back the ocean. Drop the shield. It is not keeping you safe. It is only keeping you exhausted, because true safety is not found in predicting the storm. It is found in knowing that you have the strength to withstand it. But to build that kind of unshakable strength, we must learn to accept the one reality we spend our entire lives running from. And this is where the next truth begins. 4. The Buddhist lesson of impermanence. What if the greatest source of your suffering is not that things change, but that you secretly believe they shouldn't? Here is a truth that is quiet but heavy. The tighter you hold, the more you suffer. We spend our lives trying to build monuments out of temporary moments. When we find something good, a relationship, a period of calm, a comfortable routine, our immediate instinct is to freeze it. We want to lock the door so it can never escape. And when things inevitably shift, when people change, when the quiet season ends, we feel betrayed. We panic. We think something has gone terribly wrong. Buddhist wisdom teaches that this expectation is the root of our deepest sorrow. In Buddhist thought, there is a fundamental truth called impermanence. It reminds us that everything in the physical and emotional world is in constant motion. Nothing stays. The joy you feel today will fade. The sorrow you feel tonight will pass. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that suffering arises when we demand that temporary things become permanent. Imagine walking down to the edge of a beautiful, fast-moving river. You reach out to touch the cool water. If you try to grab it, if you clench your fist tightly to keep the water yours forever, it will simply slip through your fingers. You will be left with an empty, straining hand. But if you relax your grip, if you simply cup your hands gently, the water will rest there for a moment before flowing back into the stream. You cannot own the river. You can only experience it as it passes. How often do we treat our lives like clenched fists? We try to force someone to stay who is already emotionally walking away. We try to recreate a past version of ourselves. Instead of stepping quietly into who we are becoming, we are terrified of losing our place, of being forgotten, of feeling left behind, simply because we refuse to accept that every chapter must eventually end. We grip so tightly that our hands ache, and we mistake that ache for safety. Think about your own life. Ask yourself, What are you desperately trying to freeze in place? What are you still holding on to that has already started to slip away? What would happen if you simply stopped fighting the current? You have permission to let go. Pause, breathe, open your hands. You do not have to hold it all together. Let the feeling rise without making it your identity. Watch the river flow without trying to stop its current, because peace is not found in forcing things to stay exactly as they are. Peace is found in the graceful acceptance of their passing. You can appreciate a moment without needing to own it, but accepting that things change is only half the battle. Stopping ourselves from constantly bracing for the worst of those changes is a different kind of quiet struggle. And this is where the next truth begins. What if your endless preparation is the very thing keeping you trapped? Here is the truth few people want to face. We often confuse overthinking with being responsible. When life gets quiet, you do not rest. Instead, you get to work. You start running simulations in your mind. You plan out exactly what you will say if someone criticizes you. You map out what you will do if you lose your job, if a friend stops texting back, or if everything you have built suddenly falls apart. You spend hours, days, and weeks mentally rehearsing tragedies. You convince yourself that by imagining every possible worst-case scenario, you will never be caught off guard. You think your preparation is keeping you safe. But Buddhist wisdom offers a different view of this mental exhaustion. Buddhism reminds us that this constant need to anticipate the future is merely another form of attachment. We are not just attached to people or possessions. We become deeply attached to our need for certainty. We want to guarantee our safety by predicting the unknown. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that the present moment is the only place where true agency exists. When you try to pre-live a tragedy that has not happened, you abandon the only reality where you actually have power. Letting go of the need to prepare is not negligence. It is the highest form of presence. Imagine a person who lives in a beautiful, sturdy house at the top of a quiet hill. Outside, the sky is perfectly blue and the air is warm. But instead of opening the doors and enjoying the sunlight, the person is inside, frantically nailing thick wooden boards over every window. They drag heavy furniture to block the doors. They sit in the dark, tense and exhausted, terrified that a violent hurricane is coming. They do this every single day. They never feel the warmth of the sun because they are entirely consumed by a storm that has not even formed on the horizon. We do this with our own lives every time life gets quiet. We board up the windows of our relationships by pushing people away before they can hurt us. We lock the doors to our own joy by expecting it to be taken away. We sit in the dark rooms of our own minds, exhausting ourselves with worry, while a perfectly clear day is happening right outside. We believe our anxiety is protecting us, but all it is doing is blocking out the light. Think about your own life. Think about the mental energy you spend trying to outsmart the future. Ask yourself, what imaginary storm are you endlessly preparing for right now? Are you actually keeping yourself safe? Or are you just missing out on a beautiful day? What would happen if you simply trusted yourself to handle the rain only if it actually starts to fall? You do not need to figure everything out right now. Pause. Breathe. Step away from the heavy boards and the locked doors. Stop trying to force a sense of security through overthinking. Let the feeling of vulnerability rise without letting it convince you that you are in danger. Do your part in the present, then release the outcome. Because true readiness is not about having a flawless plan for every potential disaster. It is about trusting your own resilience to handle whatever comes when it finally arrives. But finding the courage to stop preparing means we must learn how to actually sit in the stillness of today. And this is where the next truth begins. 6. Making peace with the present moment. What if the quiet you are running from is the very thing you need to heal? Here is a truth that is quiet but undeniable. We have forgotten how to just be. When you finally have a moment to yourself, when the tasks are done, when the notifications stop, when the room goes completely silent, what is your first instinct? For many of us, it is panic. We immediately reach for a distraction. We pull out our phones, turn on the television, or dive into an old worry. We fill the empty space with noise because we are terrified of what the silence might ask us. We think that if we stop moving, the pain we have been outrunning will finally catch up to us. But Buddhist wisdom teaches a profound lesson about this quietness. In Buddhist thought, the present moment is not a waiting room for the future. It is not an empty space that needs to be filled with action or anxiety. It is the only true reality. Mindfulness is the practice of simply existing in this reality without judgment, without avoidance, and without the urgent need to escape. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that healing does not happen in the noise of distraction. Healing happens in the courageous stillness of facing exactly what is right in front of you. Imagine a deep, still lake hidden in a mountain valley. When the wind is strong, the surface of the lake becomes chaotic with waves. The water is murky, and you cannot see beneath the surface. But when the wind finally dies down and the air becomes perfectly still, the lake transforms. The mud and sediment slowly sink to the bottom. The water becomes so clear that it reflects the sky, the clouds, and the moon with perfect clarity. The stillness did not create the depth of the lake, it simply revealed it. Our minds are exactly like that lake. We keep our lives chaotic, busy, and filled with worry because we are afraid of what we will see when the water finally settles. We use our anxiety as the wind to stir up the surface so we never have to look at our deeper fears, our unhealed wounds, or our quiet sadness. We avoid the present moment because the present moment demands honesty. Think about your own life. What noise are you using to drown out the quiet? Ask yourself, when you are alone in a silent room, what is the first feeling that rises to the surface? Are you really afraid of the quiet, or are you afraid of what you might hear if you actually listen to yourself? You do not have to be afraid of the still water. Pause, breathe. The next time life gets quiet, do not reach for a distraction. Let the silence settle around you. Observe the thoughts that bubble to the surface, but do not chase them. Let them rise and fall like small ripples on the water. You are the deep lake, not the passing wind. Because sitting in the present moment is not about finding an empty mind. It is about finding the courage to sit with a full heart without needing to fix it. But staying in that quiet space often reveals the heavy things we have been carrying without realizing it. And this is where the next truth begins. 7. The weight of unnecessary burdens. What if the exhaustion you feel is not from the life you are living, but from the invisible weight of the life you are trying to prevent? Here is a truth that is easy to ignore but heavy to carry. You are tired because you are holding too much. When life goes quiet, you do not just sit in the quiet. You start picking up imaginary responsibilities. You carry the expectations of your family. You carry the fear of failing at your job. You carry the silent judgments you assume others are making about you. You carry the grief of the past and the anxiety of a future that has not yet arrived. You walk through your day burdened by 1,000 different scenarios, trying to manage outcomes that are completely out of your hands. You believe that, if you just carry enough worry, you can keep your life from falling apart. But Buddhist wisdom teaches us that this kind of carrying is a trap. In Buddhist thought, much of our suffering comes from the illusion that we are responsible for controlling the universe. We become deeply attached to our burdens, mistaking our heavy anxiety for love, duty, or preparedness. The deep lesson of Buddhism is that you do not have to carry the world. Letting go is not an act of irresponsibility. It is an act of profound clarity. It is the realization that holding on to unnecessary weight does not make you safer. It only makes you sink. Imagine a small wooden boat trying to navigate a wide, fast-moving river. The sailor is terrified of the rough water. To feel safe, they load the boat with heavy iron chains, massive anchors, and dense stones, believing that the extra weight will keep the boat stable in the unpredictable current. But instead of safely cutting through the water, the boat sinks dangerously low. Now, even the smallest ripple threatens to flood over the sides. The sailor panics, blaming the dangerous river for their struggle. But the river is not the problem. The danger is the unnecessary weight they chose to bring on board. We do this constantly in our own lives. We load our minds with heavy anchors of worry. We pull the chains of past mistakes and future fears into our daily thoughts. We weigh ourselves down with the need to please everyone, the need to never make a mistake, and the need to predict every bad thing that could possibly happen. And then, when a simple, quiet moment arrives, a small ripple in the water, we feel entirely overwhelmed. We feel like we are drowning. We blame the world for being too difficult, when the truth is, we have made our own journey too heavy. Think about your own life. What invisible anchors are you dragging behind you? Ask yourself, are you carrying a fear that belongs to someone else? Are you holding on to a painful expectation just because it feels familiar? What would happen if you simply dropped the weight? You do not have to hold it all together. Pause, breathe. Imagine taking one of those heavy, fearful thoughts and gently setting it down on the riverbank. You do not have to carry tomorrow's grief today. You only have to navigate the water that is right in front of you. Do your part, then release the outcome. Because true stability is not found by weighing yourself down with worry. It is found by traveling light enough to float over the rising tide. But putting down that weight requires a fundamental change in how we view the unknown. And this is where the next truth begins. 8. Shifting from fear to trust. What if the unknown is not a dark room hiding a disaster, but an open field you have simply forgotten how to walk through? Here is the truth few people want to face. We are not just afraid of bad news, we are terrified of trusting good news. When the storm clears and your life finally goes quiet, the hardest thing in the world is to simply believe that you are safe. You have lived on high alert for so long that you mistake the absence of chaos for a trap. You look at a peaceful relationship and wait for the betrayal. You look at a quiet afternoon and wait for the phone to ring with a sudden crisis. You believe that if you trust the calm, you are being foolish. You think your fear is the only thing keeping you alive. In Buddhist thought, this constant suspicion of life is recognized as a profound source of suffering. Buddhism teaches that fear is often an illusion born from our desperate need for certainty. We want a written guarantee that we will never be hurt, disappointed, or caught off guard again. But the deep lesson of Buddhism is that you cannot demand a guarantee from an impermanent world. Peace does not come from knowing exactly what will happen tomorrow. Peace comes from a radical, quiet trust in the unfolding of the present moment. It is the realization that you are deeply capable of meeting whatever arises without needing to script it in advance. Imagine a small seed pressed deep into the dark, silent earth. It is completely surrounded by stillness. It does not know when the rain will come. It does not know how far it is from the surface. But the seed does not panic. It does not frantically try to dig itself out to check if the outside world is safe. It does not spend its energy worrying about whether the sun still exists. It simply rests in the quiet. It trusts the soil. It trusts the process of its own slow, unseen growth. The dark stillness is not a grave. It is the very place where its life begins. We often treat our own lives with the exact opposite energy. When we find ourselves in a quiet season, where nothing chaotic is happening, we panic. We desperately dig up the soil of our relationships to check if the roots are still there, ultimately damaging them with our insecurity. We constantly look over our shoulders in our daily lives, expecting failure. We exhaust ourselves trying to force the sun to rise because we are terrified of the dark. We cannot simply rest in the quiet because we have lost our trust in the natural unfolding of our own lives. Think about your own life. What would it look like to stop treating every quiet moment as a threat? Ask yourself, are you really protecting yourself by staying constantly on guard, or are you just preventing yourself from growing? What if the silence in your life right now is not a warning of bad news, but the fertile soil you need to finally rest? Is this constant vigilance bringing you peace or feeding your fear? You do not have to dig up the seed. Pause, breathe. Let the quiet season simply be quiet. When the urge to panic arises, observe the thought without following it. Stop trying to force the door open before it is time. Do your part in the sunlight and trust yourself in the dark. Because learning to trust is not about foolishly believing that bad things will never happen again. It is about knowing that you no longer have to live in fear of them before they even arrive. And this is where the final truth begins. 9. Embracing the calm. What if the quiet you have been searching for your whole life is finally here, and you are finally allowed to enjoy it? Think back to that feeling we spoke about at the very beginning. That moment when the room goes still, the demands stop, and your mind immediately begins to search for a hidden danger. For so long, you have lived under the assumption that peace is temporary, that silence is a trick, and that expecting bad news is the only way to survive. But you are exhausted. You have spent years borrowing pain from a future that has not arrived. You have carried the heavy shield of worry, trying to protect yourself from every possible heartbreak. You have gripped the river, trying to force it to stay still. You have boarded up your windows to hide from storms that never came. And after all of this endless preparation, after all this exhausting defense, you are still here. The only thing your overthinking has truly cost you is the joy of the present moment. You have given so much of your energy to ghosts, to things that never happened, to conversations that were never spoken, to tragedies that existed only in the theater of your mind. It is an act of profound self-respect to finally close the curtain on that stage. You owe it to yourself to experience the life you are actually living, rather than the one you are constantly trying to prevent. Buddhist wisdom reminds us that you do not have to live this way. Non-attachment does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to control the uncontrollable. Inner peace is not the absence of storms in your life. It is the deep, quiet knowledge that you do not have to invite the storm in before it actually rains. You can simply sit in the warmth of the sun while it is here. You can let the water flow without needing to own it. Remember the bird standing at the edge of the open cage. The door is open. You have spent so much time gripping the familiar iron bars of your anxiety because they felt safe. But the cage was never meant to be your home. Stepping out into the quiet requires a radical kind of trust. Trust in yourself. Trust that if the wind picks up, your wings will know exactly what to do. The vast, clear sky is terrifying only if you believe you do not know how to fly. You do not need to constantly practice your pain just to prove you are strong enough to handle it. You already are. Think about your own life. Look around you in this exact second. There is no emergency. The disaster you are waiting for is not here. The quiet is not a trap. It is simply space. You are allowed to take off your heavy armor. You are allowed to stop mentally rehearsing tragedy. Pause. Breathe. Let your shoulders drop. Feel the solid ground beneath your feet. For this one moment, let go of the need to fix anything, solve anything, or predict anything. If you have been waiting for a sign that it is safe to relax, let this be it. You are safe. The quiet is not your enemy, it is your resting place. Stop letting fear write a future you do not want to live in. Let life meet you exactly where you are. Do your part, then release the outcome. Stay with yourself, trust the unfolding of your own journey, and make peace with the beautiful, fragile reality of today. You can let go now.